Okay, welcome everyone. This is the October 7th meeting of the Planning Matters Subcommittee. We're going to continue our discussion on the mixed-use zoning district and amendment to zoning map. We're going to focus on the mixed-use zoning district that's presented to us by the East Long Meadow Planning Board. The time is right now 10:37, if I'm reading it correctly, in the morning. I'm calling the meeting to order. I see we have a full quorum here. We have some guests and interested parties as well. Everyone signed in to the sign-up sheet. Before I start, are there any comments by any of the subcommittee members?
Through the chair.
We've
We've received correspondence that I think we should address on one issue, that survey from, it's called the Master Plan 2020 we've received.
Okay.
And my feeling on that was it was not endorsed, it was not prompted, and that we should not even consider this. This was not endorsed by the town.
And you're speaking specifically to a letter from Attorney Fitzgerald's office?
That was attached to their letter. I'm not referring to the letter itself. I'm referring to the Master Plan 2020. It was a survey.
All right.
I believe it was done online, and from my understanding, I've heard several townspeople said they took it several times just for ha-has. So I think that we can't really consider anything from this Master Plan survey in our decision.
I think when we had a conversation with the planning board on that, I think it was even their understanding this was just a first run at it. So I believe there's going to be...
But the first run wasn't even endorsed by the planning board, is my understanding.
It was my understanding that they didn't participate in the creation of the
I know
survey,
I'm
and
stepping
certainly
away from what we normally
we
do,
can
but is that
ask.
appropriate to ask you guys right now, or is that...
Through the chair, that's not on our agenda for discussion.
Right, okay, we'll just...
But it does have, through the chair, it does have importance.
Well, only if we are at the... Right now, Attorney Fitzgerald's office is trying to summarize bullet points.
Correct.
And we're not at a point of even entertaining those discussions. I think they're you're further making other additions and stuff as you're watching what we're doing here, correct? So you're gonna have further comments, like a summary sheet?
Sure.
Of concerns?
It's just my concern
All
is,
right.
even for any developer out there, that this shouldn't be used
All
for
right.
any questions or answers.
So noted. Thank you, Sid. Okay, the first order of business now, we have a quorum and so forth, is we're going to discussion of the September 9th minutes. Now, one other point, you'll notice that we've had a change since the last meeting, so a couple of changes. Marilyn Richards, who was a citizen representative, is now a member of the town council. She was appointed at the last town council meeting to replace the vacancy from Joe Ford. And then our position was that we can't have 4 active town councilors on this subcommittee. So Tom O'Connor graciously stepped down, and we have Connor O'Shea, who is a citizen representative, who is now joining us. He was officially appointed by Kathy Hill, council president. So he will be abstaining from this vote, and when we vote on the second one for the minutes, because he wasn't present. So future votes like today's, of course, he can. So welcome, Connor.
Thank you.
All right, so we had a couple fill in the blanks and so forth, and I believe those have already been done. It's nothing substantive. The only substantive change that was brought to our attention by Councilor Page was the second line in the first paragraph. It says residential are mixed. It should be area. It should be replaced with the word area, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And any other changes that we see? The fill in the blanks are just simply, which we will have, is the time of the meeting, and it's 10:30. Marilyn's last name is Richards. We have Ralph Page. We have Sid Starks. Trying to get the right spelling for John Takena, and Joe Conley. And let me just make sure we have it right. John's last name is Taikina, and Joe's is Conley. And
While we're on it, get Jane's spelling.
Jane's proper spelling of your last name.
Mantolesky.
Mantolesky, and she is counsel as well for the developer. And let me see if they have that one. And it's Marlene Goldstein. I think it has Holstein on here. Hey, I'll tell you, Paul is a citizen.
I was very impressed.
Very impressed. He's
Regardless,
he's working off LCAT,
Right,
and
very
he
impressed.
did an amazing job for, what he had to work with. The meeting ended at about 12:30, and meeting adjourned, and tentative meeting was the 10:30 a.m. at the school committee conference room. So with those changes, do I have a motion to accept the minutes for September 9th?
I move we accept the minutes of September 9th.
Motion is made, is it seconded?
Second.
Motion made and second, any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call a vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and one abstention. And the abstention is Connor O'Shea. All right, let's jump back into our general discussion. Let's see if we all agree on where we left off.
Page 4.4.
That's what I have too. For those in the audience, what we're referring to is the final draft, May 28th, 2019, that was presented to us by the East Long Meadow Planning Board, and we have been working page by page to try to offer some comments. All right, so we're at 4.4, and what it says there is the maximum height of structures shall be 50 feet. Height may be 45 feet when over 400 feet from the front property line. Am I reading the original version, or was that an add-on from you?
Those are add-ons.
Okay, so it just simply says the maximum height of a structure shall be 50 feet.
Right.
All right, what are some thoughts on that?
Okay, since you're reading the edits that came from our discussion between Ralph and myself during the summer, the look to, or the consideration of 35 to 45 feet is the established height requirement within the residential zone, within the town, for a multifamily type facility. And I'm referencing Bluebird Estates, and Bluebird Estates actually had a 35 height maximum, but they could go to 45 feet with a special permit if it was documented that the change fit the topography, the area, location, whatever. And so it's my opinion that since this is a town bylaw and this type use can be anywhere within our neighborhoods where we have vacant property, that I felt that the 35 to 45 feet height should reference what we already have established in our town.
Okay, through the chair, to clarify, are we talking 3 stories, 4 stories? Are we talking a gabled roof, a flat roof? How do we determine that?
We're not, well, and that's a good point. I'm not looking at the design features. It's up to, they know the height, and then you back into it. That would be my answer. I'm not, the design review, whoever the developer is would come in with a plan that would reference what the bylaw reads.
Through the chair.
Yes,
I think
Connor.
50 feet is a good maximum, because I think the shops that we have in the center of town, they have like 12-foot ceilings as it is. So if we're trying to add stories on top of that, not necessarily there, but if you're trying to replicate something in another project, would it be difficult to accommodate additional floors of residences on top of that if you're limiting yourself to 35 feet?
My what we see at Bluebird Estates, I believe, is three stories. What's there right now? But that's, I'm not sure. Is it 3 stories?
My recollection
I think it is 3 stories.
and I made a side comment on that too, but I personally, the height to me is a function of, like you mentioned, Bluebird Estates. Bluebird Estates, I think, to me, I think it's, and I made a side comment here, is the sight line from the street. So if your sight line from the street is here, right here as I'm talking, remember I'm talking to the camera as well, the table height. But however, you go a few feet by 100 or so feet in there, and you're building down here, let's say it slopes down, there's a swale. Well, should 50 feet be measured from here, or can it be over here, and the net result, it'll appear from the street as only 35 feet or 20 feet? So I don't, I'm not sure if the topography, and remember, it's reminding everybody as well, I'm going to repeat, we're not voting on that project. We're voting on this, on a proposed
Right.
bylaw change. I'm just reminding, because Connor's here as well, and we have a couple people, that may be watching us for the first time on television. So,
So-
what are your thoughts, Ralph?
To jump in, we had a building, Dr. Coughlin's building on North Main Street, and we were trying to figure out where the height was measured from. So we went back to the actual definitions. In reference to a building, the vertical distance between the highest point of the roof and the average grade of land on which the building is located. So what that allowed him to do, because he's on a slope, is the front of the building may only have been, let's say, 30 feet, but because the slope goes down, the back of the building measures 40 feet off of the ground. So they went around the building, took measurements, and found what, by division, the average height was. So if you're looking from the back of the building, it's actually a 40-foot high building. From the front is 30. It met the 35-foot maximum height requirement. And to your example, Bluebird, I mean, if they're on the slope like that, it would end up being the same thing. I mean, my thought was to stay consistent with the zoning bylaws. I don't think a 5-foot is a huge difference. Look at a 45-foot maximum height. I would prefer it off of the road a little bit. But that's my vision of what we're thinking of. I'm not thinking go down State Street, Springfield, and have 50-foot high buildings, 4 floors of apartments above one little shop down below. I mean, like I said, everyone's vision's a little bit different on what development should be in town.
Well, and furthermore, this doesn't necessarily presuppose that, let's say, that the height of it is going to have stores on the first floor either. I mean, there could be discussion that if you are going to have stores on the first floor, that, as you pointed out, retail space is a higher space than a residence. However, can a potential developer take those same numbers and then end up building strictly residential, as long as they meet the, let's say the 20% or whatever percent, they don't have to have every structure does not have to have a business on the first floor, is that correct? And this standard applies to both 100% all residential, or we could have a standalone business as well, and that would be applied to the 20% number as well, correct?
Yes.
All right, so how do we find a happy medium, understanding that you could have, as presented, a 50-foot strictly residential structure?
Through the chair, if I may, I would ask the developer to please explain how he arrived at the 50-foot ideal based on the infrastructure, building infrastructure, internal infrastructure, and associated mechanicals that raise the level of the height to 50
Well,
feet.
the question, Connie, in all due respect, is how did the planning board, because we're not voting on
Right.
theirs, how did
No,
the
I know,
planning
but-
board?
So,
So the question should be answered through, if you want to answer, is how you came, or how the planning board came with that number, please.
sure, the developer who was seated at the table proposed a conceptual design for mixed use, and he explained to the planning board how he arrived, or how a 50-foot height could be calculated, if you will. So I think because he is an expert in construction and development of a particular structure, of any particular structure, what is associated with the floor levels, I think that it would be helpful for you all to understand how and why what would be 35 feet became 50 feet.
You
So,
said 4 levels? Yeah,
Or did you say floor levels?
Floor.
Okay, I needed to clarify that, thank you. Floor levels.
So perhaps we could ask,
I don't have a problem if you guys are prepared to answer how the planning board came up with the 50-foot to come to us.
Just a point of
Thanks.
clarification.
Just to make
Just a
clear.
point of clarification.
This is
So,
Russ Denver, who is a
we-
member of the planning board.
We
He's chair.
took.
Chair.
We took his discussion
Yeah.
and then contemplated it on whether we felt it was appropriate number to
Thank
give to
you.
the planning board. We didn't take it lock, stock, and barrel, so.
Thanks, Russ. Yes, John?
Thank you. No, so the planning board was very thoughtful in their consideration and actually very inquisitive about how is a mixed-use building put together. And, you know, so we started with the ground floor, and, you know, your typical, you know, modern retail tenant now is seeking anywhere from 15 to 16 feet of clear retail height at the ground level.
John, just for a sake of discussion, without putting you on the spot, how high would you say this particular is, so we can have a visual on it?
This is eight
feet?
there, 9 here,
Nine above you?
9 above me, 8 above you.
Okay, just want to have a visual. Thank you. You continue.
So, you know, even just to use, you know, to use 16, which is what we typically will strive for, then we would have between the commercial use on the ground floor and the first residential level, we typically provide for 3 feet of interstitial space there that we can have 2 different things. We have all of our mechanicals for heating, ventilation, and cooling of the ground floor, as well as any ventilation if it's a restaurant, which a lot of our uses are today. You know, they tend to be restaurants because you don't typically buy, you know, dinner from Amazon. And so you go 16 plus 3 gets you to 19 total. But the other thing that's in that 3 feet are actually all of the mechanical drainage, et cetera, for the residential uses up above. So we typically would segregate it and say, okay, 2 feet or so is going to be for the commercial below, and 1 foot or so is going to be for the residential above, as you have to drop all of your services down, both water, you know, water and sewer and all those things to get them out of the units and up to the units. So you'd be at 19 feet there, and then we would typically provide for 11 feet per floor between our different residential levels, because we would want a 9-foot clear, you want a 9-foot clear ceiling in your residences. Much like a modern single-family home today is built with typically with 9 feet on the first floor, and maybe you might have 8 feet on the second floor at some of the bedroom levels. But for your kitchen areas, your living room areas, you know, you want that to be at 9 feet. And then we provide for 2 feet of structure in between each of the floors. Again, to provide for our mechanicals, both heating and ventilation for the unit, as well as the drainage for the unit above, and to provide for sound isolation between the 2 levels. So what you end up having, as you isolate sound between the levels, is you try and almost create floating, kind of floating levels that connect at the edges, so that what's in the middle between the units, you don't have direct sound transmission from the unit above to the unit below. So that, you know, that second level unit doesn't always hear what's going on for the third level above. So so within the 50 feet of the commercial, you would have 19, 11, and 11. You know, so right there you're at 41, if I'm doing my math correctly.
Right.
And then we figured you just provide for, you know, it's New England, so we'll have a pitched roof. And again, as Ms. Richards say, you kind of back into the, you know, how high is the roof? Is it all pitched? Is it only at the edge? You know, you kind of back into your look. But, you know, you typically want either an 8-on-12 or a 12-on-12, you know, roof pitch, you know, to look right, you know, for the New England vernacular, if you will, and to provide for, you know, that type of look on a mixed use. So the thought was that the mixed use buildings would be a straight, you know, a 3-story structure with a, you know, a ground floor and then 2 floors of residential above, and then with the appropriate roof treatment. And then that, you know, further back from the street, where it would be solely a residential unit, where you could possibly have a 4-story, 4 levels of residential. And again, you would have 11, 11, you know, so you get to the 44, and then again, some treatment of the roof, you know, to get to the, to get to the overall, height, and that's where where the 50 came from. Now, could you squish it down and make it work? Sure. You could not have the 2 feet between the floors. You can do that. Again, you can, as Ms. Richards said, you can back into it, if you need to. But if you're doing it in a way that you say, I want to be, how efficient can I be? How can I build the best possible structure? That's how it would typically be put together. And the thought was that, the 4 stories would only be, significantly back from the street. And then in terms of, and I thank Mr. Page on explaining the definition of height, because I just leaned over to Jane and asked her, I'm like, how do we define height here? Because again, it's done a different way in 500 different towns. So, to say what is the average, et cetera. Now, again, everything being site specific, when I think about the site that obviously we're interested in, our site's flat.
Flat.
So, we're gonna be dealing with true height. We're not gonna have this, fall off in the back or et cetera. And by the same token, we're not gonna be able to be significantly lower than the street. Where we fall off a little bit front to back, and we fall off a little bit left to right, but basically it's flat. So, what you see is what you get. But we think that, you could be 3 stories closer to the road. And I think prior drafts by different folks actually had that step, if you will. And then, you might be 4 stories further back or whatever the sense would be, but, trying to be sensitive to the road.
John, I just got to ask, if you have commercial space down below and 2 residential above, and the total height is going to be 50 feet, and then you have 4 residentials in the back and the total height's going to be 50 feet, what difference does it make if you're 3 stories or 4? I think the main thing was shorter buildings up front, larger buildings in the back, but they're both going to be 50 feet, so you're not getting that. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying. I think
I would say if you're gonna have your commercial space up front with 1 apartment up above, which brings you to 35 feet height, and then you step back, you go a 4-story building that's 50 feet, that's one thing. But what you're describing right now, both buildings are 50 feet, whether it's 3 stories or 4.
Well, and
it
again,
just depends on whether you have commercial space down below or not.
and it depends on how you treat the roof. So, if you treat you could have a flat roof building and, that could be 40, and you could squeeze it in and make it fit. I think that 2 stories is tough. You're just getting into building inefficiencies that, in 2019, I'm not sure, is it smart to be building 2 stories? But I think that, I also think that a 3-story building, even if it's 45 or 50 feet, is perceived as a 3-story building. It's, particularly when we talk about the top being, it's the roof, you kind of perceive it much more at the eve level. So I think a 3-story building is perceived as 3 stories, as shorter than the 4-story would be. And again, I'm dealing with ideals. Ideally, I'd love 19 to my 2nd floor deck. Could you do 18? Could you do 17? Sure. You wouldn't be ideal. And when you're trying to build something in 2020, you're saying let's be ideal. Let's be as efficient as we can. Let's make sure we get all the efficiencies in there.
Marilyn's next.
I was at the planning board meeting when we discussed this, so I do appreciate the tiered levels within a development. I think texture is important. I think that it looks more appealing if you've got lower buildings, street side, and then, taller buildings in the back. About backing into it, I just need to clarify, I'm not asking anyone to compromise standards or squishing into, places or making it less soundproof or, you know, it is what it is. We want a quality development wherever it's going to be in our town. So that's, you know, that, I just needed to say that. With what Ralph said regarding, you know, the 45 feet or the 50 feet and the 50 feet, that doesn't provide for any texture or differences in building heights, and you have a flat parcel. And the last thing I want to see, with this parcel or any other parcel, I'm making my own mistake by addressing a specific plan, but we are talking about it, is that I don't want them to all look like just all building blocks of, you know, the same height building. 50 feet is the height of the industrial building that we have. At least that's what I understand. Was that measured?
It was
The one
measured- it was measured by the fire department.
And what was it measured at? I thought it was around 50
He
feet.
had gave it to me, it was just over 50 feet, 50
Right.
feet, 3 inches.
Right.
And that was the last time, a few months ago, that they were on the roof.
Mm-hmm.
They actually took a measurement for me.
Which building?
Package machinery building.
Right,
On the
right.
right-hand side, the warehouse portion of it.
And while it's not on the table, but we were involved in the first application, or the first proposal, the request was 50 to 60 feet for height. And the documentation at that time was the same thing, that the levels wouldn't change, but further on back, there would be different roof treatments to address the 60 feet. I'm rethinking my position, and, you know, based on what we're discussing today, with a maximum of 50 feet, it's 5 feet more than 45, and that's what we have at Bluebird Estates, but we're dealing with different issues than Bluebird Estates. I personally wouldn't have a problem with leaving it the way it is.
So through the chair, if I may, what you're talking about is building massing, and what we're trying to avoid today in planning is that concrete block look, you know,
Right.
which you would, so when you talk about texture, you're actually talking about the surface feature, but we're talking about massing, and we like to break up our massing to make it more architecturally appealing, interesting, variety of style. We look at step roof, and that's not necessarily this pyramid ziggurat type of shape. It's also your traditional architectural roof where you have a gable here and you might have a shorter gable here. That's also known as a step roof. So I think, I hope what I've just said also helps you to understand what we're looking at when we look at 50 feet. And also, please be mindful if there's any type of mechanical that's on the roof. Air conditioning sometime is up there on the roof now. That's also being calculated under that 50-foot threshold. So there might be things going on the roof that we want screened, that we don't want to see. We don't really want to see the HVAC on the roof. We want to see that, you know, shielded from visibility by the public as an aesthetic design.
Through the chair, I feel 50 feet is a good number. We've discussed it. We've heard examples. The planning board has discussed it. We have to put faith in the planning board. I feel that 50 feet is adequate and a good measure, so we should move on.
Okay, question then, just to kind of, the maximum height of the structure shall be 50 feet. Do we want, but do we want to have anything regarding not to exceed 4 stories for only residential, 3 if, I mean, I think it's basically just a function of what can be built there. I mean, you can't, under no circumstances, in architectural design, I'm going to ask John this question if you don't mind, is can you build a 5-story in any way in 50 feet and make it marketable?
In 50 feet, it's very difficult to do. Is it possible? Sure, everything's possible, but
Right.
it's very difficult to do. And I would have zero objection to a 4-story limitation.
And that would be strictly residential, and if you're building over a commercial, not to exceed 3 stories.
That's fine.
Through the chair.
So for the chair, just being.
He beat you just by a second, Connor.
I don't know that we need to do that, because I think as John had kind of hinted at, I think the market will dictate that. If it's not something that people are going to purchase, or if retailers would want to move into the commercial space, it wouldn't be feasible for any developer to do so.
I just-
What's the harm with including it?
Yeah, then it won't hurt. I think it's going to be one of those just for public reading and understanding where our thinking is, because you're going to get people saying 50 feet, and you'll be stopped over at Big Y, for instance, supermarket, no plug intended, and they're going to say to you, Connor, he said, you can put 5 stories, 50 feet, 5 stories. I think just sometimes the more for clarification you put in, I think it makes it the public aware that you're not going to see 5-story buildings in there as well. So that's just my take on it. But your point is well noted that just by business practicality, it's going to be inherently limited. But I think just having a little clarification might be also beneficial. Thoughts?
I have a picture. This is Bay State Commons. This is Westboro. It's a 58-acre mixed-use development, and it features actually the commercial piece and one level above it as the mixed-use piece, and then the building next to it is 3 stories, and that's residential. And it's a nice streetscape. It's appealing. I don't know what the height of the building is. I don't know if I have that information, but the whole point was, actually, it was a 56-acre project with 44-unit luxury condos and 350,000 square feet of retail space, and a 2.5-acre public park. So I mean, there's all kinds of combinations out there. And I just took this picture because of the visual of the commercial piece next to the residential piece, and for what it's worth.
Maryland, very similar. That's in Huntsville, Alabama. Which
See,
has got
now-
a commercial underneath, 2 floors of apartments up above, all brick building. The way the building's
Right.
built is in and out.
Right. It has a flat roof. It wouldn't work in Massachusetts, the snow.
You say that, except all our industrial buildings now have flat roofs. All our
Right,
schools
right,
have flat
right.
roofs.
Actually, this has a flat roof too. I didn't even realize that. There you go.
So through the chair, if I may, I concur with what Connor has said. The market is going to dictate what is going to be constructed. We talked at length, planning board discussed this matter at length. And again, I want to give a nod to Tide Richards, who is our developer on our planning board, and he has some very educated opinions in regard to what development, what type of development works here in New England. When we talk about setting other limitations, please be mindful that this falls under special permit. And we have design guidelines in our site plan review. So if the planning board looks at a design and wants to literally send it back to the drawing table, it can do so. So we want to be careful not to set too many limitations within this bylaw.
Okay. I mean,
I
my
personally think that, obviously we have a developer in front of us, we have
Yeah.
other people that we've discussed it with. I don't see an issue with including the 4 floors. I just think it's a safety feature. They're not gonna do it anyways, they already said, so there's no downfall to having it.
Yeah, there won't be. I mean, if they have because, as we're talking about, you're talking about HVAC of the present world, the 2020 world. But in 2040, they could have systems that are this thin. Who knows? Who knows? We don't know. So I think it's just, we can always revisit it, but I think with residential, 4-story residential, or 3-story, including first floor or commercial. I don't think that hurts. At this point, I think we have to deal with the technology of the present era, and if an amendment needs in the future because they don't need to put 2 feet between to have sound insulation, and we can revisit that with an amendment in the future, but at least keep it clear now. Just my take. Anyone else? No? We're in agreement on that?
50.
You do?
You do.
Yeah,
Right.
you don't.
Eh,
Yeah,
not
that's
quite,
all right.
but-
That's okay.
It's the 50.
All right,
Before-
50, we agree on the 50, right?
Yeah, the 50.
All right.
yes, but-
Before we move on through the chair, I drew a line under density and dimensional regulations. The minimal parcel size for mixed district shall be 40 acres, 20 acres. I thought because we were going to be calling this potentially calling this a village type,
Yeah.
that we were looking at the 40-acre piece.
We are.
That's where we stopped, according to the line. And the next one, we talk about the density of housing units shall be 12 per acre, based on the area of the entire, and it says parcel. We didn't discuss that to my knowledge. Does that ring a bell to anybody?
No, I think, I put an asterisk right next to it, which was assigned for further conversation. So I wasn't sure if we
Okay.
went past it, but I have no problem making sure, these are substantive points, so we should be discussing it. And I have no problem going back to 3.22 and further discuss it.
4.2.
I'm sorry, 4.2.
Right, right.
Okay.
Where'd you get those numbers? Oh, you were up there, okay,
Yeah.
I see where you were, okay. So under 4.2, the maximum housing density units shall be 12 per acre. That's what's proposed. And Ralph and I changed the area of the entire,
Word B between shall, 12.
we changed the word parcel to development. If we're
Yeah.
looking at a 40-acre parcel, things have changed since we discussed this initially. So I'm backing away from that and just, we're talking about 12 per acre based on the entire parcel. What do you think?
Okay. All right, what does that translate? What about, let's say a 40-acre piece, and then your piece.
480.
480 is the number,
And, I mean, really, realistically, what does that translate to what we will see? Because the 400, at the density of that many per acre, you're dealing with other uses there that would,
Mhm.
and, other restrictions, if you will, or regulations that would bring that number down. I have no way of calculating what a 40-acre parcel with a 12-acre, density, 12 per acre density, with 20% of commercial development, how many units we would see. Got to calculate?
Yeah, I did run through some things, and if you...
See, that's why we put you on the committee.
got
Yeah.
that right, yeah.
No, that was actually one of my concerns, was all the different percentages, because if we took the maximum space could be 40% building of the parcel, and if we went with 40 acres, then if you required a minimum of 20% commercial, the remaining 80% of that building could be residential. So on 40 acres, that would be about 12.8 acres, which would mean you could wind up with about 102 dwelling units, whatever you consider that to be.
No,
Is that-
actually, that's
yeah.
not accurate, only because the dwelling units are based on the entire parcel. So you take the entire parcel, which is 40 acres, and that's how you calculate how many dwelling units you're gonna have. Being an apartment building, 4 floors high, 1,000 units per, you can fit quite a few units in it. And so it's not gonna come to a lot coverage density or anything on that idea.
The chair, if I may, because our chair of our planning board wasn't present for the previous meetings, under 4.1, the minimum parcel size for a mixed-use development shall be 40 acres.
Mm.
Thank you.
All right, I'll go to 4.2 then, if we're done with 4.1. We are? Okay.
Mr. Chair, could I just ask a question?
Yes, sir.
So, as Connie said, I wasn't at the last meeting, so what were your thoughts on going from 20 to 40? Because there are a limited number of parcels of 20 acres or more left in town.
Here's, I can speak for myself, and maybe I'm picking up the vibe from the rest of the subcommittee. I think our our focus now is not so much a mixed-use bylaw, but a village, mixed-use village bylaw. And 20 acres is not a lot of area for a village, in our perspective, 40. We're also, hopefully one day, the planning board will consider a more traditional center mixed use, where you have a much higher percentage of business and some residential. But when we're looking at, the 80-20 type of situation here, you don't want to have a bunch of miniature villages with many, you want, a village is going to be, 40 acres we felt was a fair number for this whole village mixed use. It certainly would not apply to, let's say, Center Square area when they want to add residences above that. That'd be a whole different bylaw. So we're kind of, when we're reading what you're submitting to us, we're adding the word village to it. And I think this keeps it more of a basically a larger community, village type with businesses within that village. And 20 acres is just, you could just pop those things anywhere. 40 acres is a little more limiting, and it also, I think, keeps consistent with the understanding of what a village is, in our opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
Also, it's come to our knowledge that there is a larger parcel of vacant land in town that has been reallocated to 40-acre parcels. That's my understanding. It's behind where I live. And so it's property, and the gentleman who owned the property is deceased, and apparently the land is being planned out in 40-acre parcels. Now, whether that has moved on to A&Rs and whatnot, probably not, but the point is that that's that plan, and there's more than, we're talking 300, 400 acres
Yes.
that's being divided up into 40-acre parcels. So,
Through the chair, for the record, we've received nothing.
I didn't think so. But, it's out there. We know we have, in the south end of town, there are, large parcels that are available. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Let's see, where
So
was it?
clarification for 4.4, 50 feet?
Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
So on the 4.2, we were discussing 12 units per acre, a total of 480 units in a 40-acre development, and what we thought of that is 12 acres. Good, is it too many, is it?
Well, do we want to put, again, for purposes of clarification, say 12 not to exceed 480 units, which I think is just simple math, but do we want to create, in the bylaw to have that math already pre-calculated?
I don't think that's
Necessary,
necessary.
okay.
My thought is, what do you think of 480 units on a 40-acre parcel? Is that too many, is it too little? Should we increase it? Just for conversation purposes. I'm certain the planning board had multiple discussions on this. Was not at all of their meetings, but I know it's hard to believe.
If you weren't, I'm sure Marilyn was.
Yeah.
Russ and Connie, would they be putting you on the spot to answer to answer Ralph's question?
We spent a lot of time talking about that. A lot of time talking about that issue. I think the way we addressed it was please someone correct me if I'm misremembering this, but we spent a lot of time on the percentages and how the percentages would play into the total number of housing units. Because I think we put in, it needed to be, please help me.
There were so many, well, again, we have Tide Richards on our board.
Yeah.
And Tide was the go-to person for calculating the numbers. And these, after numerous hours of discussion on the percentage, as well as the number of units per acre, that was the number we arrived at based on the expertise that we had at the table.
And the other thing we did is, a lot of us had been approached by people in the community who were really paying very close attention to this. And I think at one time, the number 15 per acre was up there. And everybody who talked to me said, whoa, slow down. That was way too much. I know the school people had concerns about that many because they thought that it would be a burden upon town services and other things like this. We also then listened to the developers here who said that a number less than that would not make it economically feasible for a project like this. Tide was excellent on all of this, and he was able to give the planning board the education on the commercial versus the residential, and if you had too little or too many in a kind of village concept, it wouldn't work economically. Or if you had too much commercial, you wouldn't get the buyers you wanted for the residential component of it. And if you didn't have enough residential, then you wouldn't get the type of commercial people you wanted to kind of do all that. But I think that's really kind of the number we came down on. I personally thought that the 15 was too high. I mentioned Big Y. I did get an earful from a couple of residents one morning when I was there on this. But I bet we probably spent 3 full meetings just discussing that one issue on that. That's what I came down.
And through the chair, if I may, I'm hoping that Tide will be able to come by today. He has partners meetings, but knowing what was going to be discussed, we thought that perhaps he could come and visit and maybe chat a little bit and provide more information to the subcommittee, but he's not able to be here at this time.
But, and to go on to your thought, the village concept. So the village is, you have residents, but you also have the business kind of component. And you need both of them to really thrive. And this seemed to be the happy medium on that. So you had enough residents to help with the commercial, and it just sounded economically
Right.
feasible.
Now, just to follow up on that, in our last meeting, we were discussing the percentage of business, and I think the proposal that came in from the planning board originally said 5%. And we're now discussing maybe 20%. Is that, is that consistent with your idea of a village concept as well, Russ?
So another issue we spent a lot of time talking about, and I'm just trying to remember that discussion a lot.
No, we can come back.
We can come back
Yeah,
to
we can
it.
come back.
I'd like to look
Yeah.
at minutes of the meeting.
Please,
and go
Ralph.
back on it, but it was,
Jog my memory, at the last meeting, we had asked about the apartments in Enfield and how many units were there.
yeah,
And
we did talk about that.
I did send an email, I had no reply from the town of Enfield, so.
370 units
Yeah.
is what they have there.
Yeah.
And how big is that piece, 40 acres?
I couldn't come up with the exact because it's broken into a couple different
Okay.
Phases?
phases and areas.
Right.
So, looking at the GIS, I couldn't tell if that was part of it or not, so I would rather, I'm not quite sure on the acreage.
Okay.
But there was a total of 370 units.
Through the chair, but they don't have any commercial to speak
No.
of.
No, that's strictly
Right.
all luxury apartments in
Right.
there. What we were trying to do is figure out, on an acreage basis, how big that was and how many units were in there without the commercial.
And the other thing about the village concept was there was going to be, meeting rooms, there were going to be I don't call it a member, what were we going to call it, a member community house or recreational facilities and so forth and so on. So that was going to then also potentially limit the number of housing units you could put on there as well, so.
Yeah, I think we renamed, call them recreation facilities.
Correct.
Use that, we made that change too. All right.
So as a whole, we're good with 12 then, the way it's written.
I'm fine with it.
Yes.
I don't think anybody wants to push
Yeah.
forth a bylaw that's not economically feasible to
Right.
develop.
Exactly.
And nor too burdensome for the town,
Right.
Exactly.
the town services.
Okay.
Okay, 4.3, I think, and I know Connie was mentioning that a lot of the references to tables and so forth are, refer to East Long Meadow dimension and density regulations 3.2. Any thoughts on that?
Well,
That would be the table of uses for
Right.
mixed use.
So we'll go into that later.
We'll go through that later.
All right, so that's going to be, I want to write down asterisks here. All right. Okay, 4.4, we've been in agreement on 50 with for 4-story residential only, 3-story mixed use.
So
Correct?
you're amending?
Yep.
Okay, so could you give me that verbiage, because,
Okay, it's going to be, I'm not sure if we want to create a 4.5, but if we want to put it within 4.4, no more than 4 stories residential use only, 3 stories mixed use.
thank you.
4.5, building setbacks from parcel boundaries shall be 100 feet, 50, 25.
isn't this contained within the table 3.2?
That's
That
what
is
I'm
true.
that's
Yeah.
kind of where,
Right, right.
so we will
So,
discuss that when we discuss the table.
well, if 4.3 says refer to table 3.2,
Yeah.
then there's really no reason for 4.5.
Okay. We're all fine with that?
Yeah.
Letting it be covered through the through? Okay. Russ, am I missing anything? Do you have no objection if we,
No.
because you feel, okay,
It's the same. It is.
okay. 4.5, lot coverage, maximum 60, impervious, maximum 40, building coverage, minimum 40, green space. And the 60 is which says, which includes the building structure
Right,
coverage.
right. So that's 100%.
Right.
I had no problems with that.
So under lot coverage, you got 60% that's impervious. 40, the next one is 40% building coverage. Is that 40% of the 60% that's impervious?
It's 40% of the building. Impervious would be also
Driveways.
roadways, paths,
Right.
But
yes.
that's what I'm saying, is the 40%, it's 40% of the impervious surface or 40% of the lot coverage?
I'm thinking they're going for 40% of the lot coverage, is what I think they're asking for.
That's how I
Yes.
interpreted it.
Yeah.
Well, again, like I said, you read it quick and
Yeah.
it's one of those.
Is there a way we
Yeah.
can clarify it so there's no misinterpretation?
Of course you can.
The 40, of the
We're all
lot?
wordsmiths here.
Yeah, we are, 40% building coverage from,
I think our clarifier was, through the chair, a maximum 60% impervious, paragraph, parenthesis, which includes the building coverage, building structure coverage, because people get confused.
so
So we
roads
try to
and
pull it out.
parking will be 20%, would be the
20%
additional
of that,
20%.
yes. And then we did, again, state 40% building coverage, just to reiterate, and that might be
Okay.
redundancy, but at least we call it
It
out again.
clarifies it,
Yep.
okay.
Especially since I would think, since the bullet point itself is 4.6 lot coverage, that I would think.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. I said,
Would all
well-
relate to the lot itself and
Not to
prior
something
bullet.
else. Well said.
We good?
Yes, I'm
I
good.
have one question though.
Yes, Connor.
C, min 40% green space. Is there a difference between like green space versus open space, because on like .8 further down in the document, it specifies a minimum of 20% of the parcel should be dedicated to open space.
Open space would be the total overall parcel, the overall site. So when we're looking at, and we were looking at a 20 acre parcel. So tell me what section you were looking at.
It said 8 dedicated common open space requirements, a minimum of 20% of the parcel shall be dedicated to open space and not subject to development in the future.
This is like landscaping to me.
Yeah, so we're trying
So
to.
I would think green space is part of open space.
Yeah.
So is then the 20
Maybe it
conflicting
means-
with the 40?
So like, maybe we define green space as is gonna be landscape space, and, or the common, minimum, you know, you can have open space that's just, you know,
Or you can have natural area open space, which
Natural
might be
area.
woodland, waterways, you know, but then if you have
maintained green.
landscaping,
Landscaping, so,
so if you've got, you don't necessarily want to be landscaping the entire site, you want to keep.
Right.
right, so what Connor raises, you know, a good point. So we're dealing with minimum 40% green space, and then at 8, it talks about shall be dedicated open space. So maybe for clarification, we can, by open space, do we mean non-maintained, you know, just natural space that's not, and do we want it to be more of a buffer type, but then we have the 100-foot setback thing?
So let me read. Open space is any open piece of land that is undeveloped, has no buildings or other built structures, and is accessible to the public. Green space, land that is partly covered with grass, trees, shrubs, or other vegetation, includes parks, community gardens, cemeteries, schoolyards. So perhaps we address this in the definition section. We can define open space, and we can define green space. And that way, it's, again, addressed at one point within the definition section. And the reason we always address our definitions under the definition section is so that if there are amendments or changes to a bylaw, we make sure that there are no conflicts within the body of the article and the definition section. So we could do that.
So if I'm understanding correct, on number 8, the 20% of the parcel that's open space is going to more than likely include part of the 40% of the
Right,
green
right.
space.
That's how I understood it.
So I just wanted to make sure we didn't have to like landscape 40% of the whole thing or
Right.
something.
No.
Right.
So, just, do we need further clarification, as Connie was pointing out, or are we okay with at the wording as it stands? Is it clear enough, or do we
I
need
would be
further?
okay with the wording as it stands.
Along with the definition.
If
With the
we add the
definitions,
we'll be
definitions.
fine.
Okay, so add definitions to somewhere, maybe,
In the definition section.
Correct.
definitions, open, green, okay, another future thing.
And the definitions, where
That
did your
section.
specific definition come from? It's not out of our zoning.
We'll find one. We'll find a good one.
You just read them, so I just,
Oh, that was Wikipedia. Let me look at my planning books.
All right, I'm going to move to 4.7 unless there's further comments on 4.6. Hearing none. Area of landscaped buffer. And again, it's referring to business buffer zone 3.331. The buffer area shall be landscaped so as to provide a visual screening of the development, minimum rear 25, minimum side 25. Any front requirements for landscaping from the street?
Not that we talked about, no.
I would guess that they'd want it visually appealing to get people to come there anyway, so. You're not gonna,
Right.
you're not gonna put a no trespassing sign up.
Right.
per bylaw, all, there's a 10-foot strip that's mandatory street, along the street.
Okay.
Already in the bylaw.
Right.
So supposedly from the street back 10 feet, you're supposed to have a landscape buffer. That's already pre-existing in the bylaws.
I was wondering about that. The other part is if there's, all this business is gonna be a bright sign, a business sign saying, you know, Starbucks and Ruby Tuesdays or whatever, I'm making this stuff up, you know, up on the front. And if they did put one again, not so much on this project, on proposed project, but let's say they put it in to hypothetically, the one hypothetical project at Elmcrest, hypothetically. Are there gonna be signs that say, you know, bright signs, you know, coming into, like entering almost like an evergreen walk?
Well, that would be the planning board's decision on giving the signage approval.
Well, the signage regulations are now controlled by the.
Yeah,
by the
that's, I mean, we
building
lost
inspector.
that.
We lost that.
I say we as a former planning board member, I'm saying, yeah, that's now under the control of the
Building inspector.
because that was determined, that was one of those type
Okay.
of rubber stamp type things from the planning board in most cases, so the building inspector, and if anyone has an objection, then it would probably go to appeal.
But
So-
through the chair, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was, just to clarify, through the chair, under our design guidelines, the planning board does oversee the sign design. So once, if you have a plan that comes in that also includes the ground-mounted gateway signage, then the
Mhm.
planning board would review that as part of the development.
Yes, Ralph?
So I just pulled up 3.331 buffer strip requirements for business districts. There is no side yard requirement for business, and unless it abuts a residential property, there's no buffer zone. So I know we're not supposed to do this, but we just so happen to have a developer in here talking about an industrial garden park. So right now, there would be no buffers required because all sides of it, from what I understand, abut industrial garden park and not residential. Or is there
No,
one
one side.
industrial?
There's a
with the-
residential.
Yeah, the old
Yes,
Chestnut.
the one,
fields at Chestnut.
Right.
so that would be the side that would need a buffer on it. Because in the back of the property is Industrial Drive, which is industrial garden park.
But this would, if they rezoned, it just happens to, this would be a whole new zone. And what it's doing is it's picking up the requirements, at least select requirements of the business zone. So these would be the, it still seems to say, regardless of what zone it's in, if you're in this new village zone, you have to have a minimum side yard at 25 feet and a minimum rear of 25 feet. And what I'm asking is that enough? You know, because remember, it's really tough, and I have to keep getting myself out of that trap of thinking only of Chestnut Street, but imagining this type of request in, you know, on Fenway Golf or Elmcrest, hypothetically. You know, then we'd have no front requirements at all. So we have to look at it from we're creating a brand spanking new zone that maybe is picking up some of the ideas from a business district zone, but do we want to firm it up a little more, you know, to kind of create a little more of a, into the, you know, a little more buffer for the PS people enter into the village? Marilyn?
With wherever this project is going to be developed, we're dealing with larger buildings, larger structures. And whether you have a 25-foot buffer or a 50-foot buffer, and whether it's landscaped, and I believe there should be some sort of transition from one district to another. You're not gonna hide these structures. They're gonna be there. I mean, you look at Mayfair Place as you go through Long Meadow, and the structures are right in the backyard, and the houses are this high and the buildings are this high, and they're there. So, you know, I feel that that's probably part of when the plan is played out, with the design review, with special permit. Perhaps there might be a need to add something that's not here as a condition of the special permit because of where it's located. You know, it's gonna be hard to predict, because all the other parcels I talked about are right in the middle of neighborhoods. And you're not gonna be able to hide these buildings, and I don't know that you need to hide them if they're pretty, as long as they're not smack in your face. So,
All right, so 100 feet is not, that's the front setback.
setback, right.
It's not a lot.
But if you're dealing with commercial piece, you don't want the commercial piece lost in the development.
Right,
It needs
right.
to be out front.
Right.
That needs to be not your lost leader, but your attraction. It needs to bring people to the parcel. So, the 10-foot of landscape street, you know, that's in our bylaw now.
And the setback for 100 feet is going to be a natural setback, or are you going to have parking in the first 100 feet?
Oh, I wouldn't.
That's building setback, isn't it?
Building setback. yeah.
Right, so in other words, is the first building going to be 100 feet back, which that's what seems to be here, but, or are you going to park right in there and park right up front? Is there going to be a natural buffer of, that's, you know,
So generally, what you see in a mixed-use development is you see a driveway that meanders through, and then the buildings address that particular, we're going to call it a driveway, it's actually generally it's a private road. So the structures would address that road that's making its way through the mixed-use development. And usually you'll see some green space, or it depends where it's sited, but you'll see an attractive development that allows for a setback to include that private driveway that makes its way through, and landscaping.
But what about parking?
So,
I mean, right now, there's nothing that says, hey, you can't go from 10 feet off of the road all the way to the building with parking and then start your buildings.
so we like to see building behind the structure.
I mean, parking.
Parking.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It must be lunchtime. Is it lunchtime? Because
Close,
my blood
45
sugar is
45
just-
And I
minutes.
would,
Right.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would like to see that, but is that something that we need to?
I think we should. I think we should, if we're going to do 100 feet, it should be a natural setback. I don't think we want parking necessarily right on the front, especially if somebody wants to put one of these in another part of town.
I don't think it would necessarily be fair to assume that businesses would want customers to have to walk all the way around the side of the building just to come to the front.
Well, then you have
Well,
an-
no, you could have it toward the front doors could be, think of like Evergreen Walk.
Evergreen Walk, right.
Down in Connecticut. If you have, that would be an example where people are coming into it. You're driving, you don't even realize all these stores are here, and you drive into it. That'd be a good place to
That's a
check
great
out.
example.
Yeah.
Have you been?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just didn't remember
Yeah.
that.
Didn't pay attention
No.
because it wasn't.
But the parking is not like, you drive into it and go, oh, here's a nice spot, there's like parking strategic, and you have a setback over there, albeit it's not 100 feet, but it's more, the front doors of the place are open up inward to the project, which actually creates even better sound. I'm watching Russ making wait a minute here.
He's thinking.
Well,
Yeah.
I am saying, wait a minute, because I know that's that location. So there is still the requirement to have a driveway behind the buildings for deliveries and other such things. So just to, you can maybe restrict parking, but they're still gonna need access. If you want customer parking to be behind the building as you're kind of going in from the front of the parcel, you're still gonna have to allow for access, at least an access road behind of those buildings to service the buildings.
And perhaps also where trash is going to be as well. So I think 100 feet, it might be just a little
If you're not,
small. Excuse me, John?
excuse me, through the chair, if you're not using the 100 feet, it's excessive.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that the concern about you want
you want some transition between the street and the development, but to push back 100 feet and not use it is not a very efficient use of the land.
So question, if I had to visualize it, we were using other examples of your other projects. And again, we're not voting on the project, we're just trying to get an idea of what is this more like the Cherry Hill, I mean, what?
No,
Their street side, I think, yeah.
Yeah,
no,
what-
you know, and we would envision you'd put the building at about 100 feet.
But which one of your other projects is this more like?
This is the most like Fairways, Piscataway.
Let me write that down. Which one?
Fairways in Piscataway.
How do you spell that? I know it's spelled Fairways, but.
Piscataway,
New Jersey.
New Jersey.
Okay.
And, you know, so the building's at 100 feet. There's maybe a 10 or 15 foot wide, you know, pedestrian-friendly sidewalk in front of it. Then there's a full bay of parking, so, you know, 60 feet, you know, parking both ways and a drive aisle. And then you have a, you know, 25 foot wide, you know, landscape buffer that then transitions to the sidewalk adjacent to the street. So you'll have, you know, a sidewalk adjacent to the street, you know, that'll be a pedestrian way for the public, quote unquote, and then with connection, you know, obviously pedestrian connection to back, but then a 25 foot wide buffer, you know, that you could landscape and do whatever you need to do, 60 feet of parking, sidewalk, building.
All right. I'm gonna try to, you know, if you don't mind, if you could send us some more, just refresh our memory on what that project looks like. I'm gonna Google Earth it anyway, so, but if you have others, just to kind of, you know, give us an idea, just so I'm trying to visualize it, because maybe, you know, maybe 100 feet is more than enough, but I don't know.
No,
I'm just trying.
100 feet, the 100 feet is great, you know, because I think you treat it the way that I just
But
described.
if you're putting dumpsters within that 100 feet, if you're
No,
putting.
dumpsters in the back, you know, because then you're gonna have all that in the back.
All right, and so on this Fairways, the parking's in the front within the 100
There's
feet?
one bay of parking in the front, and then there's parking along the streets on the side that lead back to the residential behind. And then there's some parking behind, with all the dumpsters and all that is
Right.
all
Shops at
behind.
Evergreen Walk.
Interior,
Like that.
interior.
Interior.
I think this is
100 feet off the street now.
So you have the street.
Yeah.
So the villa's at Fairway?
Sidewalk, yeah.
I think we're 100 feet off the street now.
But they do have a buffer.
Are you? I think so, where the existing
Right.
offices
Yeah.
are, or the old
You want-
offices.
isn't it turning it?
Not the one
Is
that's
that the
up
right one?
closer.
That's it.
Right.
That's it. All right, so
Where the
that
offices
reels
are.
back to my first point. Shouldn't we have, like they have there, some type of landscape buffer from the street?
I mean, you can just,
Which is what they have it right now. It
you can
seems,
just have 4-7, just add a C and just have front 25 feet.
for, not setback, but.
No, no,
for
buffer.
For buffer, yeah.
So rear, front, rear, and side, you have 25 feet all the way around.
And that, what you just saw is about 25 feet?
Yep.
I have no problems with that, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with it, because I want to get an idea, and,
So that would be C.
So a minimum, so at 4.7, as John has nicely suggested, minimum front yard or front 20, yeah, minimum front 25 feet landscape buffer.
yeah, I'm good with that. Everyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at Industrial Garden Park, and right now the setback is 75 feet. And that's why when we jumped to 100, it was like,
All right, but if we have the first 25 being landscape, you know, attempted landscape.
With a sidewalk,
Yeah,
because,
but you saw the picture he pulled up of the villas at Fairway, right?
I had my binoculars over there.
Anyway,
we'll look at it later.
yeah,
Okay.
and he'll send pictures as well, but thanks for looking.
Don, I
Yes.
I believe a comment was made, they feel you're roughly
I
100
think we're
feet
about
off
100
now,
feet now.
where the existing package machinery offices are
Right.
Yeah,
off of the road.
not
So-
the medical pod. The medical pod sticks
It's
up.
closer to
Yeah,
the road.
but that gives you a general feel for how far back 100 feet is.
Okay,
It's a lot of land.
Yeah, because right now they have that huge parking view, driveway, whatever in front that's multi-vehicles deep.
Yes.
Tractor trailer can turn around in
Yes.
front.
There seems to be one in there every time I drive past.
Yes, there does.
All right, so 4.7, we have minimum rear 25, minimum side 25, and minimum front 25.
Perfect.
Okay. 5, utility requirements, all structures which require,
Ty just popped in.
and I'll just note, because our notes, Ty Richard from the planning board has joined us. Welcome, Ty.
Thank you.
All right.
With an S in the end.
Ty Richard.
No relation.
I'm related to Charlie,
Oh, Charlie.
because his doesn't have an S in the end.
Okay, that's right. Well, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Ready to move to 5?
5.
Yeah.
Okay, utility requirements. All structures which require plumbing shall be connected to a public sanitary sewer and public water system. I think that's kind of
Self-explanatory.
self-explanatory. The current place is all public water, public sewer. Is that correct, Joe? Yeah.
I got a question.
Yes, Ty.
What about watering grass well water? Strictly for irrigation only?
As far as that's concerned, I have no issue with that. If we want to put some language.
So we're
The fields of Chestnut have irrigation, well water.
Just want to make sure it's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that would address 5 at all.
No,
Okay,
that's
so
just
just numbers.
basically for serving, sanitary and board of
Yep.
health type matters, but anything.
And I guess since
Outside.
it says all structures, it wouldn't be a structure for
Yeah.
for watering the lawn.
That's true. Yep. Number 6, parking and circulation requirements. We're now on the top of, at least my version of page 5 of 7. Let me see, make sure I'm not-
You're on number 6.
Okay. This,
Maybe the page
Point
breaks.
6 on page 4.
Page 5. Maybe, I think the page breaks are probably off.
Yeah, on the original it's page 4.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yes.
anyway,
These are added.
that's because it's important.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, parking and circulations, this was an add-on. Parking shall be in accordance with the Town of East Long Meadow parking specifications, East Long Meadow zoning bylaw, section 5.61.
Where are you reading that?
This is an
That
add-on.
was- it
That's
was-
why I
that
said-
was-
that's why I prefaced it. This is going to be.
I know, but where are you
Under
6.
6, parking and circulation requirements.
Yep, I got that.
Okay.
But
Okay.
are you adding it as?
That's been a
F?
suggestion.
No, right at the beginning, a paragraph before we start with,
I got it, okay. So you want to say,
Parking shall be in accordance with the Town of East Long Meadow parking specifications, East Long Meadow zoning bylaw, comma, section 5.61.
And after specifications, just put a comma before East Long Meadow.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what was that section?
Part,
5.61.
Thank you.
all right, minimum parking spaces. All right. 1 space per bedroom. Here's where I have a concern with that. We're looking at what's the typical size unit? Not necessarily yours, but yours is the best example. That, John, if you don't mind me asking, 1,000 square feet?
180 square feet.
But a typical size apartment or?
Apartment, 1,200.
1,200, and most are gonna be 1 bedroom? Or-
No, there'll be, most would be 2-bedroom.
Okay.
Typically would not have a 3-bedroom apartment at all.
Mhm.
In the mixed use, you're gonna have more 1-bedrooms than you would usually. Typically, we're trying to get to 40% 1-bedrooms is our target minimum.
40% 1 bedroom?
40% 1. So 60-40 split.
Just myself, I know John's marketing, me and Joe are marketing to millennials, as just as an example. $2,500 a month rent. I'm thinking 1.5 minimum per bedroom. Or 1.5 minimum, or one if there's, or two if there's two bedrooms. That's just my take on it. If you're doing a one bedroom, you can't just assume it's gonna be one individual in there. You gotta assume it might be a couple.
But I think, Don, if you go down through,
Right.
What we're saying under D is the planning board may require additional visitor spaces if they deem it necessary. So my thought was one per bedroom. If they feel that it's going to be needed, additional, then mandate it. But this way here, we've set the bylaw at one, and then we give it to them based on the design and what they feel. If more is needed, then they're allowed to require it.
In the previous proposal, it was 1.5 per unit. And there was discussion, at that time, we weren't sure, one bedroom, two bedroom, or even three bedroom. And so the discussion was double income, no children, two cars, perhaps a sport car that they bring to the site with them. You know, this is luxury living.
Mhm.
So that's why then there was the push for one space per bedroom, and that's probably why it factored into this proposal here.
I don't have a problem, two spaces for two bedrooms, but if it's one bedroom, I think the calculation should be based at 1.5. That's just me. I don't know if that means adjust something else, because
I think we have to be careful though, because the more spaces that we start to require, the more impervious surface that we have, and now we're paving more.
Now I
so-
segue into what Sid Starks was talking about is, and I'm not adverse to.
Don't yell at me.
No, he was talking earlier about maybe allowing some form of parking garage, aesthetically done.
Through the chair, if I may, most
Yes.
developers would want to go underground before they put a parking garage up, because residents want to access their car via the building they live in, not go traipsing across the parking lot to schlep their groceries. That's a fact.
Well, let's take a look at the fairways, are most of
Be more
the
apt to use a parking
people, is that a
garage.
60-40 split too, John?
It is up front, in the back, it's all twos.
It's all twos? And
Yeah.
so typically.
The
in your-
mixed use area is at least 60, yeah, the mixed use area is 60.
The one bedrooms are usually one individual or two people,
Usually one individual,
usually?
two people that usually get the two bedrooms. Again, you'll have a couple, and then they'll want the den or the guest room or whatever you want to call it. For the second bedroom, the single people will take the one bedrooms. Very rarely will you get a couple in a one bedroom. Just they want a little more space there, again, because you have this mix of millennials kind of coming up, and then you have, folks like myself that are downsizing, and trying to come out of a four or five bedroom house into one is a bit stark. So the two seems to work from that perspective. The ones are more the couples coming up or the singles coming up. And again, from the mixed use standpoint, you have to remember there's going to be some of the parking that's going to be there for the commercial as well. So you really don't want to over-park the residential requirement, particularly with the mixed use, because the commercial spaces are going to, be empty at, 9 o'clock at night. So it actually is a really nice ebb and flow where, as the commercial winds down going into the evening, the residential starts to ramp up, and so you kind of want the spaces to be shared. What we are finding, through the chair, is that our parking, we are actually trying to create more garage parking, but like a traditional garage even in our residential buildings, where you just pull into the, it's a single car garage, but you just pull into your garage, and then you're into the building and access it. And we think particularly here in New England that would be a very attractive type of arrangement. So buildings that heretofore, I would think of as a 32-unit residential building, now I think is a 28-unit residential building, because I'm gonna take one side of the ground and make it garage, take the back side and make it garages, so that you have that access point to be there. So, you really, and particularly now, and I think even ITE hasn't caught up to it yet, or Urban Land Institute of Transportation Engineers, or the Urban Land Institute. I'm not sure they've caught up completely to this new rideshare car share economy. We're finding that our parking demands are down tremendously.
Now, I can understand and appreciate Uber and Lyft, but I also can tell you in this area, it takes a little longer to get an Uber or a Lyft. And it hasn't really, I don't think Western Mass has quite picked it up as well as other larger communities yet. So, I'm also concerned about, then how about visitor parking? Do we have any spots allocation for visitor parking? I mean, that could-
Well, again, from a, in the mixed use area, absolutely, because you're literally gonna have the commercial parking that'll be there. That'll also serve as mostly your visitor parking for your residential. Then as you wind your way back, if you're in a multifamily condominium or apartment situation, you're gonna have parking lots that, are gonna have visitor parking in it, et cetera. And then when you go to a townhouse situation, what we would typically do is, in addition to, you have your 2-car garage and your driveway, that I would think would count as 3 spaces anyway, typically. But in addition to that, you'd want to provide additional guest parking in the townhouse areas. Because even guests, even though I'm going to 123 Mockingbird Lane, I typically wouldn't park in their driveway. So you would want to provide that additional guest parking in the townhouse areas. But in anything that's multifamily or condominium or mixed use, you have a parking lot. And that is more than sufficient for any of your guest parking to be there. Because again, you have, if it's in a multifamily or apartment situation, you're gonna have 5% of your units are gonna be vacant virtually all the time. At any one time, 5% of your units are vacant. So, you kind of have that built-in buffer there. And then you combine with who's not home, who's on vacation, who's wherever else. So that ebb and flow works very, very well. Your parking lots are, I can't think of any that are ever full. The busiest one, certainly not at Fairways, but even thinking of Cherry Hill, where, we have, a small apartment area that's adjacent to the commercial and everything else. Even that one, and it's, at most it gets to 70% full. And that's parked at 2 per unit, even with the 1 bedrooms, and it's just not there.
Well, that leads me to, it ties in a little bit further into this same discussion, but maybe it's appropriate to discuss now. What if they had it that it's 1.5, hear me out, provided but not paved with the reserve, whereas if you find out your guessed on your projections about people using Uber and Lyft are not quite correct, and we now have people not having enough parking, then in the future, then the planning board could require that this overflow parking area then be used, but you build out on 1 per here. However, you have an emergency area for a 1.5 if necessary, without it being paved. Anyone else thought on that?
When you go down to item E,
That's kind of where, yeah.
there was a request for some reduction in parking requirements regarding, if they can document, or if the developer can document that the parking that is being requested meets the needs of the facility and it's less than the minimum that's required, they're asking for that. And Ralph and I put together additional language with that, saying provided, that this would be okay, because the uses out there are unknown. And if the proposal can document that, this number of parking spaces, whatever it be, is sufficient at that moment in time, the words that we wanted to add was provided that the difference between the minimum required parking and the amount requested be designated on the site plan as future parking and left as green space. About the extra parking, obviously the visitor parking, there's going to be some discussion about that at the planning board level and the special permit. However, you don't know what the uses are going to be, the commercial uses now versus the uses in the future may be different.
Understood.
And have different needs, and so, but if it's green space, it's there on the plan, it's there if you need it, if not,
Reserved for future
it's green
parking.
space.
And what I'm saying is, you don't necessarily asphalt at 1.5, but you have a 1.5 part of the calculations in the future green space, that if it's necessary, if the calculations that millennials are using Uber and Lyft, if it turns out not to be as correct in the Western Mass area, like I said, I can attest to it in Boston, for sure, and other parts, other larger, but if that's wrong, at least, to prevent people from parking on Chestnut Street and so forth, that we have that emergency space that the planning board could then say, listen, this just isn't working. We need to, you do have a lot of couples living together on the one bedrooms, and then have that available, but not asphalt it right on the onset, but at least have it factored into future parking as well. That's just, go ahead, sir.
Through the chair, usually apartment complexes, the high end at least, and I know in the past, even 30 years ago, would have assigned parking for apartments or the residential spaces. So the apartments would actually, I remember in Kentucky, we were allowed 2 parking spaces for a 2-bedroom apartment. Do you foresee through the chair, do you foresee like having an assigned parking space if you've got a 1-bedroom apartment? Here's your parking space. If you have another vehicle, you have to park in the overflow or somewhere else.
Other than a garage, typically
Yeah.
no.
Okay.
And again, because we're a little more fastidious about distribution
Okay.
than,
Right.
so we typically wouldn't build quote-unquote a bad parking space.
Okay.
So, you want buildings that access off of both sides,
Right.
that do those types of things, so that, you let the residents distribute themselves. They decide, you know what, I always come in this way, and my unit's on the west side, so I'm gonna park on the west side.
Right.
My unit's on the east side, I'm gonna park on the east side, and it kind of distributes itself. So we typically don't have
Okay.
those issues. And again, more because of distribution than anything else. The only thing we assign are garages, mainly because we'll charge for it.
Okay.
A garage will be $100 a month.
My thought is on that.
Joe, you're next.
Just through the chair too, don't even think about rideshare as Uber and Lyft. A lot of rideshares now where you can go rent a car
Yes.
for 10, 15 minutes a day, half hour, 20 minutes, and that seems to be taking off. It's quite popular back home.
Oh, I know, I said I see that, even bikes and so forth in many larger, but I haven't seen that in East Long Meadow or
Right.
Long Meadow yet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So what I'm suggesting
Uber's
is,
here. You don't have Zipcar, right? Like Zipcar and those?
Not yet.
They're not here yet?
no, not here, probably up in UMass area or, up in Amherst, but probably, but not in Western Mass. We tend to be 2-3 cars per house.
No, Uber's, I know Uber's here.
Yeah.
I know that's here.
So my suggestion, again, is not necessarily create Asphalt City, but at least have it as part of an overflow, create the possibility that if your marketing calculations are wrong, that the extra parking can then be built out, created as part of landscape buffering, which can then be paved if necessary. Again, at all costs, we do not want parking on Chestnut Street or on Summers Road or on Allen Street or any other hypothetical project because we miscalculated the demand for alternative transportation.
Through the chair.
Please.
So one per bedroom is okay, with an option depending on supply
Right.
and demand for future options?
I would say 1.5 design, 1 build in the asphalt, pave. But the option is reserved for future use.
Again,
Ralph.
through the chair, I think the design is gonna drive what's required. My thought is you go with the 1, and you let the planning board distinguish whether or not they think more spaces are gonna be necessary. And if they think so, then they will mandate it. And, I mean, they're the ones that are gonna be seeing the site plan and the special permit, so let them deal with that aspect of it. I also think under the mixed use, like they said, in the evenings, when a lot of the businesses close, you're gonna have a lot of open spaces. I think as far as visitor and overflow, that will more than take up for it.
Well, I guess just, so the thought is keep it at 1 space per bedroom. My thought is 1.5 design, but keep it at 1 space per bedroom.
Through the chair, if I may.
Connie, please.
You know, I think with all due respect, Uber is here. I use Uber when I need to get somewhere. I've lived in apartment communities for a number of years now, and it's not like living in a single-family residential dwelling unit. You don't have the whole family over, they're not going to come to your place, they're not going to be looking for a parking space. It's different, and until you experience it, you do not know. So we've spent a lot of time crafting this verbiage, and I thank Councilman Page for his comments because they really hit the nail on the head. The planning board would be the one who would be able to issue or review the plan and say, we need more parking, bring this back to the table when you've shown us more parking based on your needs. I, as a professional planner, do not like a sea of parking. I think it is ugly. I think that it creates impervious surface. I think it causes damage and creates more stormwater runoff.
I agree, Connie. I think maybe I'm not clear on what I was suggesting.
No,
I said I
but-
don't want asphalt city.
I know you did, but you're still, what you're creating is an area, and somebody has to maintain that. Oh, what are we gonna do? We have to plow this in the winter. And what are you gonna do with these are the thoughts that will
It could be green space,
occur.
it could be green space, it could be plantings, it could be something that,
But nobody's gonna want to turn that over into asphalt at some point. I think when a developer comes in with a design, he or she knows what it is that they need. And it's generally based on market conditions. And I do know from my own experience with my peers, they've gone from 2-car to 1-car because really they don't need 2 cars anymore because one might be retired or somebody's decided they're going to bike to work because they want to be a little more physical. So you're seeing adaptive use by people. And to ask for more parking is actually going to be something that is a hindrance to the development of a quality and thoughtful design. And I think we should just stick with essentially what we have and allow the planning board to require additional parking if they find, based on the presentation of the proposal, that it might be necessary.
well, in all due respect, we don't know. If they're marketing 40% of the units, 1 bedroom, and at the planning board stage, they don't know if most of them are gonna be couples or not. They don't know, I
But
mean-
generally, what people will see is, oh, I only need, oh my gosh, and this is what happens. A decision is made to either reduce the number of vehicles per household, or make other provisions, or not to buy there, or not to
Well,
live there.
that's true, and I can absolutely personally attest to that with both my kids living in Boston. But both of them have 1-bedroom houses, and they're living with their significant others and there. So, and I see even the other units in the same project, the same condos, also 1 bedroom with more than 1 person. And of course, yes, my son got rid of his car as well, but that's Boston. Boston has the T, has other transportation. We don't even have a closest bus is, let me think, Big Y is over in that area. We don't have any bus routes over there. What I'm just saying is, I don't want asphalt. Again, it's just my take on it. I'll defer to the.
Through the chair.
Again.
Should we vote on this so we can move on?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. You guys, all right, okay with 1 space per bedroom? You're okay with it?
Yes.
I am.
Okay, you are too? All right, we'll go to the next one. Next one is 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area of commercial and business uses. I see a comment for a number _5. Does that mean 4.5 or a number 5?
4.5. May I? Through the
Please.
Chair? And I'd like to add C and D, B and C together. The request was for 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area, and D was 1 space for 4 seats for restaurants. And my question was, we originally had 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet for planned business development. And that's the center square shops. And you'll remember when we were on the planning board, I went to town meeting after having done some research and felt the requirement was too great, so the bylaw was then changed to 4.5, which allowed Center Square to have some freedom with parking with the restaurants and whatnot, and that's history. Same with the restaurant formula, which is currently in our bylaw, 3 seats rather, per 1 space. Why, I would think a restaurant in there would have the same needs as a restaurant in the center square as the parking requirements, because Center Square is a mixed use, i.e. Business, commercial, town uses, where there's a sharing of parking. I want to hear why you went from 4.5 to 4 for the commercial, and then from 4 to 3, or 3 to 4. 3 is a requirement for the restaurant to 4. Just want to, maybe there's a reason. Maybe I don't understand. Maybe it's part of the shared concept, but the shared concept is in place in Center Square at 4.5.
See, John wants to answer, but I'm going to allow our folks from the planning board, see if they can answer.
So the zoning bylaw was drafted several years ago. Things have changed. So what we're trying to do is keep pace with the current environment. And it was based on conversations that we had from the developer who has worked in this field, as well as Tide Richards, who is our resident developer, and those were the numbers that we came up with.
So,
Ralph.
through the chair, if I may, obviously you've visited Center Square Grill, the restaurant, many times. We have difficulty parking, even with all the town spaces that are available, with this formula. If we have a successful restaurant or 2 over there, who's to say we're not gonna have the same exact difficulty? And it would be even more so with less parking spaces required. That's my concern, especially with a restaurant. There's been many times where I haven't even gone in, because I've driven around and all the way up to the library is completely full at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, so I leave. I'm not quite sure why we would want to lessen the number of spaces required.
Connor?
I would think part of it's just because of the different type of environment, right? In Center Square, we don't have housing right next to the restaurant. So if we have people that are living there that we're expecting would occupy these restaurants at night, they're just walking downstairs or across the parking lot or across the parcel. They're not getting in their car and driving to the other side of town.
Unless it's a good restaurant, then you're gonna be
Right.
drawing people from multiple towns in,
No, but
there
on
would be
top
some-
of the 400 units.
But the planning board also,
Sorry.
John?
I'm sorry, through the chair. The planning board also considered that you would have a percentage of the residential parking that's required for what's upstairs available at 7 o'clock for that restaurant user to come and use, because I'm not home yet. Or you're gonna have their office use that isn't being used at 7 o'clock anymore. So those spaces can be used by the restaurant and vice versa. So again, it's this whole shared parking concept where the residential, the commercial, the office, the restaurant together, can use that same space 3 or 4 or 5 times during the day, as opposed to, a Center Square situation where it's predominantly now becoming predominantly restaurant and service oriented, where its peak is gonna be, 6 to 7 or 8 at night. And, that's how it's having to change. If you go, fortunately or unfortunately, if you go around to the front, where Rockies is, plenty of spaces in front of Rockies at 8 o'clock at night. But to walk around the place to get over to Center Square Grill is a little bit different. Likewise, if you go to Center Square Grill, at 8 o'clock at night, I'll park behind Frank's office and just walk down that sidewalk there, and that's actually the closest spot. But again, I'm required to eat there every time I'm here, so I've learned how to best do it. But the key is the mixed use, that
Right.
that you have both the fact that there will be people present from the housing, but more, as importantly, that you're going to have those parking spaces that are quote unquote required for the apartment and the office, that are going to be available to that restaurant at their peak. And it's kind of what the planning board is talking about in E, in the reduction of the parking requirement. So for anything that we do, we're going to present to the planning board what's called a shared parking matrix. And it's put out by the Urban Land Institute, and they're the ones that are the ones that do all this research. And they say, okay, at 6 a.m. in the morning, you're going to use 97% of your required residential parking, but you're only going to use 10% of your required commercial parking. And then, at the peak retail period, say we'll use a Saturday, at a peak retail period, which is going to be 1 or 2 in the afternoon, you're going to use 100% of your retail or restaurant requirement. But I'm only going to need 60% of my residential requirement. So you're going to kind of pick and choose so that you're never getting to the 100% of everybody being required, but you're able to build at maybe 80%. So you're not having to have a sea of asphalt. You're not having to have this big, asphalt parking lot. You're able to break it up and break it down so that we can most efficiently use our parking resource, so that it's utilized, fully 24 hours a day, and that it's full. You really want a full parking spot, a full parking lot, and to be able to utilize it. And the perfect parking lot is a parking lot that has one empty space, because that's all you need. You need one, because then when you pull in, there's one there, and you get to it. But so that's what E is. E is saying,
Well,
how do we put that shared parking concept together for the mixed use, so that we're fully utilizing that resource.
So through the chair, I commend you, like I said, with E for the reduction, absolutely. But what my suggestion would be is to stay with our existing bylaw, the requirements, and allow them to reduce that through the planning board as long as they keep the space. We did that with W.F.
Young, right.
And they've never had to use it, so it looks like part of their lawn.
We did it with Romitos as well.
Well, Ramitos had a hybrid formula.
Yeah.
Because of the uses peaked, there were some more active in the morning and some more active in the evening, but they didn't cross one another, so that's how we were able to do that.
So the bylaw is 4.5 and 3.
Yes.
On a share, that's fine.
And like I said, then you can reduce it when you come in and say, hey, we're gonna keep this area, we'll leave it as grass, but if we do need it, we have a spot to put in.
All right, so we're okay with the 4.5 and 3 to keep it consistent with the bylaw.
Thank you.
All right, is that agreed by everyone? No
So
objection?
where are you amending this?
6B is, instead of 4, it's 4.5. 6C will be from 4 to the number 3. All right, item D, the planning board may allow for additional visitor parking spaces beyond the 1 space per bedroom if deemed appropriate, given the design, layout, and density of the proposed mixed-use development.
That addresses your concern.
Can it be said that this, in law terms, we usually say this will survive the delivery of the deed, but can we have something in effect that this provision can be even after approval, if it comes out to their attention, or is it once it's already, because how do you know? I'm okay with it the way it is, unless they, and one comment was, instead of the word allow for, have the word require, may
Planning board may
require.
require additional visitor.
Are we okay with that, require instead of may allow?
Where are you?
D, 6D.
So don't forget, this is special permit. And anytime a special permit is modified, it has to come back before the planning board. So if this scenario was going to come to fruition, the developer, owner, applicant would have to come back before the planning board. I want you to please be mindful that you shouldn't make this is a bylaw under special permit, and if you're too strict, then you just,
So are you saying that allow versus require is too strict in the
so you're at E.
Under D.
under
D.
D?
D, the planning board may allow for additional visitor parking spaces beyond the one space per bedroom if deemed appropriate, given the design, layout, and density of the proposed mixed-use development. So that would be, if the applicant says, or the developer comes in and developer says, we'd really like to do 1.5. Well, the planning board could allow this under the special permit. You don't need any more language to muddy the water.
No, actually, it's not any more language. All we're looking for is to start, the planning board may require additional instead of allow for.
Because they're a special permit granting authority, they are
So-
the ones.
So you have the authority to say, yes, you have to do it.
Well, it's kind of you have an allow or you have a require. I mean, both words are appropriate for different.
Require sounds a little
So
bit
if you were to
more.
allow/require, that gives the planning board an option either to allow or to demand it.
It's still under special permit through the chair.
Right.
Which gives the planning board the power
To require.
to require it. So
And-
I'm okay with allow.
But, okay, you're okay with allow, but what about require? What if the planning board says, hey, wait a minute, I don't think you have enough parking. I want to require that you create some more parking.
That's under the special permit. That's your decision.
Yeah, but I think require says that. That's just, allow means that the petitioner is asking for additional parking.
Right.
We would like you, special permit granting authority, permission to do this. Whereas the special permit granting authority says, we
We're mandating.
will require based on the input that we have on this project. So I think require is probably, with the word may still being there,
Okay.
gives more
Keep the word may
permission.
in.
Right,
Yep.
because allow seems to be in a response to a request, whereas require is having the planning board special permit powers to mandate it if they may feel it's necessary. So, are we okay with require on that one, everyone?
Through the chair,
Please, Connie.
let's read this sentence, and let's look at one space per bedroom up above at A. The planning board may allow for additional visitor parking spaces beyond the one space per bedroom, A, if deemed appropriate, given the design, layout, and density of the proposed mixed-use development. Well, if you require, then you're going to say, then it needs two. I think, again, you're encouraging people to utilize one space per bedroom. So it is up to the planning board, based on the presentation of the developer or the applicant, to petition their cause to ask for more. And then the planning board may allow them to have more than one. So.
What if the
Right, so one's a
What if
response.
it's in the reverse?
What if it's in reverse?
Right.
Because what if the I'm asking, this doesn't suggest the planning board may require additional parking spaces in their special permit wisdom, even though it can. But this makes it clear that a petitioner is asking permission no, we really need more parking space, please allow us to do that. So that's a response to a request.
So they may allow for additional parking.
Right, and they also may, but the planning board without that that allowance,
Request, right.
can feel, that says, listen, I understand, we think this is a little too aggressive, you guys want to put an Emerald Lagasse's in here, you want to put something like that, that's going to be drawing a lot of people off-site. We're going to require additional parking space.
Okay,
So,
so.
I think it really puts, it just basically states the obvious that the planning board is a special permit granting authority, may possibly, may allow, in this case, require additional space based on the information.
Yeah.
Given the design, the layout, density. And that's where my next point
Well,
is.
I'd like to be able to require, but most likely the planning board would prefer not to. So it would only be an extreme situation.
It would
where-
be.
Only an
where-
extreme,
Extreme
yes.
situation where you see a
That's
site
what you're
plan, you say,
looking at.
wait a minute, all the parking's over here, I think you need some more parking over here.
And
This
then
isn't
you
gonna work,
require it.
which would be a requirement.
Well, like I said, I'll give you a classic example. Take a look at a Dunkin' Donuts, for instance. Back in the early days, the first instance of a Dunkin' Donuts, back in '97, it was considered a bakery. And the parking requirements were based on a bakery, baking donuts, coffee and donut type thing. Well, obviously, the business changed into more of a restaurant-esque.
The donuts were good.
Who knows, you know? Paul Carey might be watching, so you never know. He lives in town.
Through the chair, just a question. I
Yes,
think
Joe.
what Connie's talking about, 6D is referring to bedrooms. I don't see her talking about anything else. I think that's what Connie's point was, I'm not too sure. That's why I'm confused on the issue.
Well, we kind of get off on a track,
You
we start
went
talking
off
about
a little
retail
skew.
and restaurants and everything
Yeah.
else.
Right.
Donuts.
6D was specific to bedrooms.
Lunchtime, hungry. All right.
Yeah, I would say that D relates directly to A, but not to B or C.
Yeah, I think we got to rework that. All right, I promised you guys 2 hours. We are at 2 hours. And we have about 3 pages to go. I think we need
We
to,
still have the.
and the table of
the
uses.
table of uses.
Well, just to go through this one,
Right, right.
hopefully.
No, okay, just want to let you know.
All right.
Through the chair, if I may.
Yes, Connie.
We have Ty Richards here now. You had some questions earlier about development. Do you want to address them?
What did we end up
While
with
we have
prior or last?
the planning board member here?
Hmm?
Do you want to, you were talking about the percentages.
Through the chair, excuse me, through the chair, Connie.
Please.
Should we make a decision on require or allow, so we can
Yeah,
allow
so-
Connie to talk and Ty to talk?
Well, I think to require and allow, I think the valid point that was made is, should we just not limit it to bedrooms? That we say that may allow additional, may require additional parking spaces for other uses.
We're under number 6, which is parking and circulation requirements.
Right.
I mean, that's the requirement to the development, parking and circulation requirements. The first one talks about bedroom, then we go on to commercial, and then we go on. So you've got to go back to the main heading, which is the broad over the whole thing. It's not just about residential, it's about the whole thing.
All right.
I
So-
say we put in that the planning board can require it, and it gives them the ability to say you have to do more if in an extreme situation, the plan comes in where they need it.
All right,
And
do
it's
we-
not just the one bedroom.
So we want to change it so that the requirements can go beyond the scope of bedrooms. It can be other.
I think it,
So we need to change that. All right.
All right, I
Okay.
got a question for you, though. As a developer, I'll be sitting here thinking to myself, well, how can I keep a planning board that goes rogue from just, requiring things that are just completely ridiculous, either, who knows what the reason might be. So from the developer standpoint, it's nice to be able to have some kind of a top as well. I just don't know how to, I'm thinking in my mind how to say that.
If your planning board went rogue, I don't think the word require would even come into play. I
All right,
think they
well,
would.
in any event,
you
maybe
know,
I used the
it's-
wrong
it's-
description,
well,
but it,
Through the chair, may I make a suggestion that
Yeah.
we start off at this next meeting?
I was
and
about.
have a chance to discuss
You
it?
just were reading my mind, Sid.
Thank you.
All right, let's say, this is a real good point. I think we're gonna continue at our next meeting, which will be the 21st of October, provided we can get this room, at 10:30 right here. And we will start at item 6D. And And with that being said, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Should we listen to Tide first? through the
Oh,
chair?
listen, okay, I'll, Tide, any other parting comments?
I've only been here a little short period of time, so
Please.
nothing right at the moment.
So through the
Regarding
chair-
parking, what's happening is office space is 3-1, retail space is 5-1, medical office space is 6-1, and we don't have any medical office space, we can forget that. Our office space is gonna be very low impact parking, it's only 3-1, and those office users are gone at night when the residential is being used. And retail doesn't need to be 5-1 anymore, particularly in this particular project, because it's mostly gonna be service retail and not retail where people are gonna be in the store for a period of time. Blending that together is what we need to talk about when we get back together on the 21st, but that's where we're at.
Okay.
And restaurants is all by itself out here, how to handle those, because they're high, as we all know, high parking users, and, you know, you can't compete with residential parking spaces for, you know, restaurant customers. If a guy doesn't want to come home to his apartment at 7 o'clock at night and find out the restaurant's using all the spaces and he can't park his car.
Well, I mean.
That's why we changed the bylaw. I
Yeah.
mean, that's why we changed the recommendation.
Exactly.
So let's go to Urban Land Institute and do some reading between now and the next meeting, because that gives us an awful lot of guidelines.
And we actually, Connie, you got that information we have from, in Boston on planning, mixed-use planning and so forth. I think we're doing okay, guys. I think we are. I think we're doing all right.
We had a question, and
His question?
we had said we would wait for Tide with regards to percent commercial, 5% as compared to 20%, and as a developer, how the planning board came up with
The
the
5%.
5%, and why 5% to me sounds like this is a massive residential development with a very little spattering.
And that was my
of a
issue
couple
too.
stores.
In my issue, we, as a planning board, I don't recall how we actually got to the 5%, but I was all over the board in this at first, because I started out in my own mind at 20% retail or mixed use and the rest of it residential, and I kept thinking to myself, I don't want this to be an apartment complex with one tiny little commercial space, and in order to call it a mixed use project, which is why I talked about 3 different uses: retail, office, or restaurant, or some other kind of use, so it wasn't gonna be 2-use project, but a 3-use project. And I thought the 5% was low, but now I look at the other side of the coin and I say, this is not gonna be Long Meadow Shops where you're gonna have a lot of retail. The only retail you're really gonna have is either gonna be food related or service, period. I mean, Talbot's isn't gonna move here. I mean, they're gonna stay where they are. And those kind of retailers are also going to be, you know, where the center of the population is. So this is really gonna be mostly service and food and apartment. But it should be broken down into 3 different uses.
And that's sort of contradictory to the reading I've been doing about mixed-use developments and how you present a development. In fact, I printed up, I don't even remember the name of the one that we just looked at recently, where it talks about providing a balance of uses. And that's what Marilyn Richards bought into in terms of mixed use right from the get-go, that we would be bringing services, and this goes back to the last project, we would be bringing services to the south end of our community, where we have to go to Connecticut or Long Meadow or almost into Springfield to buy groceries. I mean, I don't mind, I have a new car, I love driving it, but the point is that it's an opportunity to grow and to bring some services to that neck of the woods, not just for the village.
Yeah.
That's the concept of a mixed use.
Yep. Then the other side of the coin is, let's say you make it 20%, and now you've got, for 10 years, 50% of that 20% vacant. I mean, that doesn't do us any good either.
Then it comes to the point, then the fit's not the right fit for that location, any location, that if you have to go down to 5%, that's not a mixed use. And so, here we are.
That's a high-end
That's a
hotel.
high-end, it's just a big residential development, and that's not what we need.
And I, you know, had concerns about that, city like Boston, where you're doing it, where it's easier to attract all those other types of users outside of residential. I mean, we're really in a residential community, and we have a couple of retail hubs, but outside those retail hubs, we're a residential community. Once again, now we go back to the other side of the coin, is I don't want this to be an apartment complex, because if that's the case, just apply for an apartment complex and forget this whole zoning discussion that we're having. So what is the balance? I don't know. I mean, like I told you before, I was at 20%, and I've slowly whittled myself down, because I also don't want vacancy here. But I don't want just an apartment complex. I always thought 5 was a little light, but, you know, at the
I
end of the
mean, my
day.
thought is if Hens grocery store goes in at 25,000 square feet, that accounts for quite a bit of the commercial space at 20%. Then you throw in a few little stores, and all of a sudden, you're right up to the 20%.
And if you don't get the grocery store, what happens?
Then you get another 25,000 square foot building to come in.
And-
Or
and-
215s, or...
Just give me an example, and I'm just talking out loud with you. Who might be the other 25%? I don't need the name of the business, but what type of use were you thinking?
Well, I don't know, the way Center Square Grill's going, they may need to. Or they'll take over all of Rocky's Plaza. I'm just saying, we're allowing for something that size. And when you start comparing to the square footage, you take one facility at that size, that adds a lot of square footage.
If you can lease it. Now, earlier in the
Yeah.
beginning of this project, their developer was talking about the possibility of Aldi. So there's 24,000 feet, well, they fluctuate a little bit, 24,000 feet, let's say. Well, that's great, but if you don't make an Aldi deal, who's gonna fill that 24,000 feet? See,
Let's continue that conversation,
Yeah,
because,
exactly.
okay, 'cause I want to be true to what I promised everybody. All right, so I'm going to take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion made, motion
Second.
seconded, motion made, seconded, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
So we'll see you guys, hopefully, 2 weeks from today, 10:30, right here,
Hopefully.
if we can still get this room. All right, thank you.